Most people looked at the truck for less than 2 seconds before deciding what kind of man was driving it. And that was the first mistake they made. Rain slid across the curved glass walls of the halcyon motor gallery in slow silver lines, blurring the reflections of Bentleys, Ferraris, and black executive SUVs parked beneath the white entrance lights. The dealership sat at the edge of downtown Chicago like a museum designed for people who never checked prices, all marble floors, dark wood, and silence expensive enough to feel intentional. At 8:14 on a gray Thursday evening, a faded dark blue pickup rolled beneath the front canopy between a pearl-white Rolls-Royce Cullinan and a graphite Aston Martin DBX worth more than most suburban homes. The valet attendants stopped talking immediately. One of them lowered the tablet in his hand and stared at the truck as if it had accidentally crossed a border it was never supposed to find. The pickup was old enough that the paint near the wheel wells had started to lose its shine, but the body was unusually clean, every panel aligned perfectly, every headlight clear, every movement of the engine quiet and controlled in a way older trucks usually were not. The driver shut the engine off and sat still for a moment before opening the door. Ethan Cole stepped out wearing a charcoal work jacket darkened slightly by the rain and jeans that had been cleaned carefully that morning. He looked like a man accustomed to carrying things without complaint. Nothing about him asked for attention. Nothing about him explained why the dealership security cameras had just redirected themselves toward his truck automatically. Lily climbed down from the passenger seat holding a worn stuffed rabbit against her chest, her blonde hair tucked beneath the hood of a small raincoat. She looked up at the towering glass building and then back at the cameras slowly rotating above the entrance. "Dad," she asked quietly, "why are they following the truck?" Ethan closed the driver's door with a soft click and glanced once toward the cameras before taking Lily's hand. "Probably a system error," he said. But inside the dealership, a young technician monitoring the digital security feeds frowned at his screen. The truck's plate had triggered an internal recognition protocol he had never seen activate before. A small gold banner had appeared in the corner of his monitor for less than a second before disappearing again. Authorized vehicle detected. No customer plate should have been connected to the executive testing database. The technician looked back toward the front entrance as Ethan and Lily stepped into the showroom. Warm light spilled across polished marble beneath their shoes. Piano music drifted quietly through hidden speakers overhead. Conversations lowered almost automatically as people noticed them. Men in tailored jackets glanced briefly at Ethan's boots, then at the truck outside, then away again with the smooth, practiced dismissal wealthy people often mistook for subtlety. Lily squeezed her rabbit tighter. Ethan simply removed the rainwater from his jacket sleeve with one calm motion and continued walking deeper into the showroom as though he belonged there more than anyone else in the building. The air inside Halcyon Motor Gallery carried the faint scent of polished leather and fresh espresso, the kind of carefully engineered atmosphere designed to make wealthy people feel even wealthier. Ethan walked beside Lily at an unhurried pace, his boots leaving small traces of rainwater across the marble floor before the hidden ventilation system dried them almost immediately. Every surface around them reflected something expensive. Chrome trim caught the ceiling lights in long white streaks. Glass walls mirrored rows of handcrafted vehicles positioned with mathematical precision beneath soft spotlights. Near the center platform sat a silver Aurelius V12 Roadster with its doors raised open like wings, surrounded by a semicircle of guests holding crystal glasses and speaking in voices low enough to sound important. Lily tilted her head slightly as they passed it. "That one looks uncomfortable," she whispered. Ethan glanced at the car for less than a second. "It probably is." A salesman standing nearby heard her and smiled without warmth. "Most people here are not buying comfort," he said. Ethan nodded politely and kept walking. The salesman watched him for another moment before quietly stepping sideways to block access to the roped display area. Across the showroom floor, Brandon Pierce emerged from a glass office overlooking the main lobby. He moved with the relaxed confidence of a man who had spent years learning how to identify money within the first 5 seconds of eye contact. His suit was perfectly fitted, his watch expensive without appearing flashy, and his expression permanently balanced somewhere between pleasant and dismissive. He noticed Ethan immediately, not because Ethan looked important, but because he looked out of place. Brandon's eyes moved from Ethan's worn jacket to Lily's stuffed rabbit and finally toward the old pickup still visible through the rain-covered entrance glass outside. He exhaled slowly through his nose. "I will handle this," he told the younger salesman beside him. The salesman nodded with visible relief. Brandon approached with a smile polished enough to sound professional from a distance. "Good evening," he said. "Can I help you find something?" Ethan stopped beside a dark green prototype coupe positioned near the rear display wall. The lighting around it was slightly different from the rest of the showroom, colder somehow, more clinical. "I was hoping to ask about this model," Ethan said calmly. Brandon's smile faded almost invisibly. "That vehicle is invitation only." Ethan rested one hand lightly in his jacket pocket. "I figured." Lily wandered 2 steps toward the coupe and studied the dashboard through the glass. "Dad," she said softly, "that symbol is on our truck too." Brandon's attention sharpened immediately. "Excuse me." Lily pointed innocently toward the small metallic emblem near the center console. It resembled a narrow silver triangle inside a circle. Brandon looked toward Ethan again, this time more carefully. Ethan simply placed a gentle hand on Lily's shoulder. "You do not have to point at things," he said quietly. Nearby guests had begun noticing the exchange. Not openly, just enough sideways glances to feel the shift in atmosphere moving through the room. Brandon recovered quickly. "Sir," he said, lowering his voice slightly, "that section of the showroom is reserved for private clients." Ethan gave a small nod. "Then we will stay over here." Brandon studied him for a second longer than necessary. Most people either apologized or became defensive at that point. Ethan did neither. That unsettled him more than it should have. Above them, one of the security cameras rotated slowly and locked once again onto the rain-covered pickup outside. Rain continued sliding down the outer glass walls in soft, uneven patterns while the showroom lights reflected across the wet pavement outside like strips of liquid gold. Ethan stood quietly beside Lily near the rear section of the gallery as conversations slowly resumed around them, though not completely. The room had not returned to normal. Small pockets of attention kept drifting back toward the old pickup parked beneath the entrance canopy. A woman in a white designer coat glanced toward it twice while pretending not to. 2 younger sales associates near the espresso bar lowered their voices the moment Brandon walked past them. Halcyon Motor Gallery was built around certainty. The staff always knew who belonged there within seconds. Tonight, for reasons no one could quite explain yet, that certainty had started to crack. Brandon kept his expression controlled as he adjusted the cuff of his suit jacket. "Sir," he said smoothly, "most of our inventory requires a scheduled consultation before viewing." Ethan nodded once. "That makes sense." Brandon waited for more. Most people in Ethan's position either became embarrassed or defensive after hearing something like that. Ethan only looked calmly through the glass at the green prototype coupe. The silence forced Brandon to continue speaking. "Perhaps I can recommend something more accessible downstairs." Lily looked up at him immediately. "We already came upstairs." Brandon smiled politely at her without changing the expression in his eyes. "Yes," he said, "I noticed." Near the reception desk, the security technician monitoring the camera feeds checked the system again. The alert connected to Ethan's truck had appeared a second time, this time accompanied by a restricted internal reference code he did not recognize. He clicked the notification before it vanished again. "Access level Omega." The technician stared at the screen for several seconds. Only executive development vehicles carried Omega tags, and none of them were supposed to exist outside private testing facilities. He looked toward Brandon across the showroom floor, hesitated, then quietly sent a message to upper management instead. Lily slowly wandered toward a display table covered in leather-bound catalogs and paused beside a scale model of a silver hypercar. She studied it carefully without touching it. "That is the Ventari prototype," one of the younger salesmen said quickly as he approached. "Please do not handle it." Lily pulled her hands behind her back immediately. "I was not going to." Ethan stepped beside her without urgency. "She understands." The salesman gave a short nod and walked away, though not before glancing again toward Ethan's jacket and worn boots. Ethan noticed it. He noticed all of it. Years earlier, those looks might have irritated him. Now they only made people easier to understand. Across the room, Brandon's phone vibrated once in his pocket. He checked the message discreetly and frowned. Security flag confirmed. Executive alert active. He looked sharply toward the pickup outside, then back toward Ethan. For the first time since approaching him, uncertainty entered his expression. He walked toward the entrance windows and studied the truck more carefully. The vehicle itself still looked ordinary to everyone else. Older body frame, slight or near the rear bumper. Clean tires. Nothing impressive. But near the lower edge of the windshield sat a small metallic decal no larger than a business card. Brandon's face tightened slightly the moment he recognized it. He had seen that symbol once before during a private corporate presentation 2 years earlier. It belonged to Helix Division, the confidential engineering program owned directly by Halcyon Automotive's executive office. No independent customer should have access to anything carrying that mark. Behind him, Lily's soft voice broke the silence again. "Dad," she whispered, "why does everybody keep staring at the truck?" Ethan watched Brandon through the reflection in the glass before answering. "Because people get nervous when they realize they missed something important." The temperature inside the showroom seemed to change without anyone adjusting it. Conversations continued. Glasses clinked softly near the lounge bar, and piano music still floated through the ceiling speakers. But underneath all of it, something subtle had shifted. Staff members who normally moved with polished confidence had started glancing toward one another before making decisions. The uncertainty was small, almost invisible, but in places built entirely on image, even hesitation became noticeable. Brandon slipped his phone back into his pocket and walked toward Ethan again, this time slower than before. He stopped beside the prototype coupe and folded his hands neatly in front of him. "Sir," he said carefully, "I am going to ask directly. How exactly are you connected to Helix Division?" Ethan looked at him with mild curiosity, as though the question itself was not particularly important. "Why?" Brandon forced a small laugh. "Because internal development identifiers are not public." Ethan glanced toward Lily, who was studying the stitching on one of the showroom chairs with quiet concentration. "A lot of things are not public," he said. Brandon's jaw tightened slightly. Nearby, 2 guests pretending to compare financing options had stopped pretending altogether. One of them subtly lowered his phone to record video. Brandon noticed immediately. He smiled again, but the warmth in it had disappeared completely now. "Sir, I think it would be best if we continued this conversation privately." Ethan nodded once. That is usually how important conversations happen. The answer irritated Brandon more than open hostility would have. Ethan never sounded defensive. He never sounded impressed either. He spoke like a man completely detached from the hierarchy everyone else in the room took seriously. Before Brandon could respond, an older customer near the espresso bar lost his balance slightly while adjusting his cane beside the marble step leading into the lounge area. His glass tipped sideways. Several employees noticed it happen. None moved quickly enough. Ethan stepped forward first. One hand caught the glass before it hit the floor, while the other steadied the man gently by the elbow. Smooth. Automatic. No performance in it at all. "Easy," Ethan said quietly. The older man exhaled and adjusted his footing. "Thank you." Ethan handed the glass back carefully. "The floor is slick near the edge." He stepped away immediately afterward without waiting for appreciation. Brandon watched the entire exchange in silence. Lily looked up at her father with the calm familiarity of a child who had seen him help strangers 100 times before. The older customer studied Ethan for another moment before noticing the pickup outside through the rain-streaked glass. His expression shifted slightly. Recognition. Not complete recognition, but enough to unsettle him. He looked toward Brandon. "That truck belongs to him." Brandon answered without looking away from Ethan. "Apparently." The older man frowned faintly and said nothing more. Across the showroom, the security technician received another system notification. This one did not disappear. Executive priority signal active. Do not restrict vehicle access. His stomach tightened immediately. Only the executive office could issue a live priority override, and nobody from corporate headquarters was supposed to be on site tonight. He picked up the internal phone and called the upper floor reception desk. "You need to notify Ms. Hale immediately," he said quietly. "The Omega vehicle is here." Upstairs, behind smoked glass walls overlooking the city skyline, Victoria Hale paused halfway through reviewing a quarterly production report. "Repeat that," she said. The receptionist swallowed. "The system says an Omega tag vehicle just triggered an executive priority alert downstairs." Victoria slowly lowered the report in her hand. For 3 full seconds, she said nothing at all. Then she stood up, so quickly her chair rolled backward into the conference table behind her. "Do not let anyone touch that vehicle," she said, already moving toward the elevator. The elevator descending from the executive floor moved faster than Victoria Hale remembered it ever moving before. Reflections from the city lights slid across the brushed steel walls as she stood perfectly still inside the private compartment, one hand resting against the rail near the control panel. Her expression remained composed, but the pace of her breathing had changed slightly, and the assistant standing beside her noticed immediately. Victoria did not react emotionally to problems. That was one of the reasons the board trusted her with Halcyon Automotive before she turned 30. She approached problems the way engineers approached structural stress points, quietly, directly, without wasted movement. But Omega-level alerts were not ordinary problems. Omega clearance belonged to a development program so restricted that most executives inside the company did not even know it existed. Only 4 prototype platforms had ever been built under Helix division. 3 were accounted for. The 4th had disappeared almost 2 years earlier after a closed testing project was abruptly terminated by corporate legal teams. The file connected to it had been sealed permanently, at least officially. Downstairs, Brandon had started losing control of the room without realizing it yet. The attention surrounding Ethan no longer felt dismissive. It felt cautious. Guests continued pretending to browse vehicles while quietly watching every interaction near the prototype display area. Staff members who normally moved through the showroom with rehearsed confidence had become noticeably slower, as though everyone subconsciously understood they were standing too close to something important without knowing exactly what it was. Brandon stepped slightly closer to Ethan and lowered his voice. "Sir, I am going to ask one final time. Who gave you authorization to access Helix technology?" Ethan looked toward the rain-covered entrance for a moment before answering. "Nobody gives authorization forever." Brandon frowned. "That does not answer the question. It was not meant to." Lily gently tugged at Ethan's sleeve before pointing toward the front windows. "Dad," she whispered, "the security guards are watching the truck now." Ethan glanced outside calmly. 2 dealership security officers had quietly positioned themselves near the pickup without touching it. Neither looked comfortable. One kept checking his earpiece every few seconds as though waiting for instructions that were taking too long to arrive. The truck itself remained still beneath the white canopy lights, rainwater sliding slowly across the hood in narrow silver lines. It did not look valuable. That was the unsettling part. Most expensive things announced themselves immediately. This one did not. Near the lounge area, the older customer Ethan had helped earlier leaned toward another guest and spoke softly enough that only fragments carried across the marble floor. "I saw one of those symbols before," he murmured. "Years ago. Detroit Conference. Government Contract Division." The second man looked toward the truck immediately. "Military." The older man shook his head once. "Worse. Private." Brandon heard enough of the exchange to feel tension spread through his chest. The situation was evolving beyond embarrassment now. Embarrassment could be managed. Public uncertainty inside a luxury dealership could not. He straightened his posture and motioned discreetly toward the front desk manager. "Clear the floor near the entrance," he ordered quietly, "and stop people from recording." Before the manager could move, the entire showroom lighting system dimmed for less than 1 second. Just a flicker, barely noticeable. Then every digital display screen across the dealership reset simultaneously. Conversations stopped immediately. The giant presentation wall above the showroom floor turned black. So did the customer financing screens near reception. Even the interactive sales kiosks shut down at the same time. For 3 long seconds, the entire dealership sat in silence beneath emergency backup lighting. Then the central display screen slowly came back online. A silver Helix emblem rotated once against a black background before disappearing again. No advertisement followed it. No explanation appeared. The system simply restored itself and returned to normal operation as though nothing had happened. Nobody in the room moved. Brandon stared at the screen in complete silence. Lily looked up at Ethan. Was that supposed to happen? Ethan adjusted the cuff of his jacket calmly. "No," he said quietly. "That means the truck recognized the building." At that exact moment, the executive elevator doors opened across the showroom floor, and Victoria Hale stepped out into the silence. Victoria Hale, crossed the showroom floor with the controlled speed of someone trying not to alarm the people watching her. The sound of her heels against marble echoed through the sudden quiet, while every employee in sight straightened instinctively the moment they recognized her. She wore a black tailored coat over a charcoal business suit, rainwater still visible near the shoulders from the short walk between the executive tower and the dealership entrance upstairs. Her attention moved across the room quickly, not scanning people first, but systems. The rebooted display screens. The disabled sales kiosks still reconnecting to the network. The security officers standing near the pickup outside. Then finally Ethan. Brandon stepped forward immediately. "Ms. Hale," he said, visibly relieved. "We have a situation involving a customer and an unauthorized helix marker." Victoria held up one hand gently without looking at him. "I know." The answer silenced him faster than anger would have. Victoria continued walking until she stopped several feet from Ethan and Lily. For a brief moment, nobody spoke. The entire showroom seemed to contract inward around the silence between them. Lily shifted the stuffed rabbit against her chest and looked up at Victoria with open curiosity. Victoria noticed the child first. That detail mattered to Ethan more than anything else she could have done. "You brought your daughter into this weather?" she asked quietly. Ethan glanced toward the rain outside. "She wanted to come with me." Victoria nodded once. Her eyes finally moved toward the entrance windows and locked onto the pickup beneath the white canopy lights. The composure in her face changed almost invisibly. Not fear. Recognition. Real recognition. Brandon noticed it immediately. "Ms. Hale," he said carefully. "We were in the process of removing them from the restricted display section before the system's malfunction occurred." Victoria slowly turned her head toward him. "Removing them?" Brandon adjusted his posture. The vehicle triggered internal security conflicts, and the customer could not verify authorization. Victoria looked at him for several seconds without speaking. The showroom had become so quiet that the low hum of the ventilation system above them was suddenly audible. Finally she asked, "Did you touch the truck?" Brandon hesitated. "No." "Did anyone attempt to scan it?" "No." Victoria exhaled slowly once, and for the first time since arriving downstairs, some of the tension left her shoulders. Ethan watched the exchange silently. He had the calm expression of a man observing a system finally beginning to correct itself. Victoria stepped closer toward the entrance glass. The pickup remained motionless outside, old rainwater reflecting silver beneath the canopy lights. To anyone else it still looked ordinary. But Victoria noticed details nobody else in the building could recognize. The custom wheel housing. The modified rear suspension sitting slightly lower than factory specifications. The barely visible sensor array embedded beneath the front grille. Then her eyes settled on the metallic helix marker near the windshield. Her face lost color for less than a second. "That is impossible," she whispered before catching herself. Brandon heard it anyway. "You know this vehicle?" he asked carefully. Victoria did not answer immediately. Instead, she walked slowly toward the glass, stopping just close enough for the reflection of the truck to overlap with her own. "Only one Omega platform prototype survived final testing," she said quietly. "The rest were dismantled." Ethan finally spoke again. "That was the official report." Victoria turned toward him sharply. It was the first time since entering the showroom that she looked directly into his eyes instead of at the truck. Something passed across her expression then. Not confusion anymore. Calculation. Memory. She studied his face carefully, as if searching through years of sealed meetings and confidential reports for a detail she had forgotten. Brandon shifted uneasily beside them. "Ms. Hale," he said, trying to regain control of the situation. "Should I contact corporate security?" Victoria kept her eyes on Ethan. "No," she said quietly. "Corporate security already knows he is here." The words landed across the showroom like a dropped piece of glass. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Then Lily looked up at Ethan and asked the question everyone else in the building was suddenly afraid to ask. "Dad?" she whispered softly. "Why does she look like she already knows you?" No one in the showroom seemed willing to breathe too loudly after Lily asked the question. The silence stretched across the marble floor in thin, invisible lines while rain continued tapping softly against the massive glass walls outside. Victoria Hale looked at the little girl for a moment before answering, but her eyes drifted back toward Ethan almost immediately, as though some unfinished equation in her mind refused to settle correctly. "I know the vehicle," she said carefully. "I am still trying to understand the driver." Ethan gave the smallest nod imaginable. Not agreement. Not denial. Just acknowledgement. Brandon shifted beside them, visibly uncomfortable now that the balance of authority inside the room had started moving beyond his control. "Ms. Hale," he said cautiously, "if this man has unauthorized access to Helix assets, corporate legal should already be involved." Victoria finally turned toward him fully. "Do you know what Helix division actually was?" Brandon hesitated. "Advanced Development Engineering." "No," Victoria said quietly. "That was the public description." Her voice remained calm, but every employee nearby had gone completely still, trying to listen without appearing obvious about it. Victoria folded one arm lightly across her waist while keeping her attention fixed on Ethan. Helix was the only program inside Halcyon Automotive that operated outside the quarterly profit structure, she said. No marketing department. No dealership previews. No investor presentations. The engineers inside that division built systems years ahead of public release and tested whether the company was capable of surviving its own future. Brandon frowned slightly, not fully understanding. Ethan did not react at all. Victoria noticed that too. "Most executives never met the lead platform architect," she continued. "He refused public appearances. Refused interviews. Half the board thought he was arrogant. The other half thought he was dangerous." Lily looked up at her father quietly. "Architect?" she whispered. Ethan rested a hand lightly against her shoulder. "It is just another word for builder." Brandon stared at Ethan now with growing disbelief. "You are telling me this man worked for Helix?" Victoria answered before Ethan could. "No," she said softly. "I am saying Helix was built around him." The words seemed to drain the remaining sound from the room. One of the younger sales associates near the reception desk lowered his phone slowly, suddenly aware he might already be recording something he was not supposed to possess. Outside, the pickup remained motionless beneath the canopy lights while thin streams of rainwater slid down the windshield around the silver Helix marker. Victoria walked slowly toward Ethan until only a few feet separated them. "Ethan Cole," she said quietly, almost testing the name against memory itself. "You disappeared after the Denver prototype incident." Brandon blinked. "Disappeared?" Ethan looked past her toward the rain outside. "I resigned 3 days before federal review teams arrived," Victoria replied. "Every Helix file connected to Omega vanished the same week." Ethan said nothing. Victoria studied him carefully, and for the first time since entering the showroom, something colder appeared beneath her composure. Not hostility. Frustration. "Do you have any idea what happened after you left?" she asked. "The board dismantled half the division. They buried every surviving platform. They locked Omega behind executive clearance because nobody could stabilize it without you." Brandon looked between them in complete confusion now. "Omega is a vehicle platform?" Ethan glanced toward the truck outside again. "Not exactly." Before Brandon could ask another question, the giant presentation wall above the showroom suddenly changed screens again without warning. Every digital display across the dealership froze simultaneously. This time no reboot followed. Instead, a single line of white text appeared across the main wall in silence. "Omega driver verified. Executive access restored." Several employees visibly stepped backward. Brandon stared at the screen as color slowly disappeared from his face. Then another line appeared beneath the first. "Priority authority transfer complete." Victoria's eyes narrowed instantly. "No," she whispered under her breath. Ethan looked genuinely surprised for the first time all evening. "That should not have activated automatically," he said quietly. Lily tilted her head toward the glowing screen. "Dad," she asked softly, "what does authority transfer mean?" Ethan looked at the display for a long moment before answering. "It means," he said carefully, "the building just decided who it belongs to." The white letters remained glowing across the presentation wall, while nobody inside the showroom seemed capable of deciding what to do next. The words were simple, clean, emotionless, but they had changed the atmosphere of the building more completely than any raised voice could have. "Priority authority transfer complete." Brandon stared at the screen as though waiting for someone to explain it away, but no explanation came. Employees near the reception area slowly stepped back from their terminals. One of the security officers outside removed his hand from the radio clipped near his shoulder and simply stood still beside the pickup. Even the guests who had been pretending not to watch had stopped pretending entirely now. Victoria Hale remained motionless for several seconds before finally speaking. "The system should not be capable of autonomous transfer," she said quietly, more to herself than anyone else. Ethan's eyes stayed fixed on the glowing display. "It was never autonomous," he answered. Victoria looked sharply toward him. "You told the board Omega was incomplete." Ethan gave a small nod. "It was. Then why is it overriding executive infrastructure?" Ethan rested one hand lightly against Lily's shoulder before answering. "Because someone finished the integration after I left." The realization hit Victoria instantly. Ethan saw it happen in her face before she said a word. "The board reopened the project," she whispered. "Without you." Ethan did not respond. He did not need to. Brandon finally found his voice again. "Ms. Hale," he said carefully, "what exactly is Omega?" Victoria looked toward the pickup outside as rainwater continued sliding slowly across its hood beneath the white canopy lights. "Officially," she said softly, "an adaptive vehicle intelligence platform." Brandon frowned. "And unofficially?" Victoria hesitated for the first time all evening. "A system designed to recognize authority independently of corporate hierarchy." Several people nearby visibly stiffened at the answer. Ethan noticed. "That was the part they never understood," he said quietly. "You cannot build a predictive intelligence platform and then expect it to obey people simply because their names are on office doors." Brandon looked completely lost now. "You are talking about a truck like it is alive." Ethan glanced toward him calmly. "No," he said. "I am talking about a system designed to recognize patterns humans usually miss." Lily looked up at her father. "Like when people pretend to be nice?" Ethan's expression softened slightly. "Something like that." Victoria slowly walked toward the entrance windows again. This time she studied the pickup, less like an executive reviewing property and more like someone confronting a memory she had spent years trying to file away. "You built Omega to evaluate decision behavior," she said quietly. "Not status." Ethan nodded once. "Status is easy to fake." Brandon's face slowly changed as pieces finally began connecting in his mind. He looked around the showroom at the guests, the employees, the disabled systems, then back toward Ethan standing quietly beside his daughter in a rain-darkened work jacket. Understanding arrived all at once, and with it came visible panic. "The transfer," he said slowly. "It chose him." Victoria did not answer because she already knew that was true. One of the younger technicians near the reception desk suddenly looked down at his tablet and went pale. "Ms. Hale," he said carefully, "there is another system notification." Victoria turned immediately. "Read it." The technician swallowed hard. "Executive access permissions are being rewritten in real time." Brandon took a step forward. "Rewritten by who?" The technician looked at Ethan before answering. "It says the originating authorization comes from the Omega architect profile." Silence fell again. Brandon stared at Ethan with open disbelief now. "You still have access?" Ethan finally reached into his jacket pocket and removed a small black key card no larger than a hotel room pass. No logo. No company name. Just a thin silver helix symbol embedded near the corner. Victoria's expression changed immediately the moment she saw it. "That credential was destroyed," she said quietly. Ethan turned the card once between his fingers. "That is what they told the board." Brandon's breathing had become shallow now. "You have been inside the system this entire time." Ethan looked at him calmly. "No," he said. "The system has been watching all of you." Before anyone could respond, the showroom entrance doors unlocked automatically with a soft electronic click. Outside, the pickup's headlights turned on by themselves, cutting white reflections across the rain-soaked pavement, while every digital screen inside the building suddenly displayed the same sentence in silent silver letters. "Welcome back, Ethan Cole." The silver words remained glowing across every screen inside the dealership, while rain hammered softly against the glass outside, turning the entire showroom into a reflection of itself. "Welcome back, Ethan Cole." No advertisement followed. No company branding interrupted it. Just the message hanging silently above rows of million-dollar vehicles and the people who suddenly no longer understood who actually controlled the room. Ethan slipped the black helix card back into his jacket pocket with the same calm motion he might have used putting away a grocery receipt. Nothing about him changed. That unsettled Victoria more than the system takeover itself. Most people who regained this kind of authority would have enjoyed the moment. Ethan looked almost tired by it. Lily shifted closer to him and watched the glowing screens with wide eyes. "Did the truck say hi to you?" she asked softly. A few nervous laughs escaped from people nearby before dying almost immediately. Ethan looked down at her. "Something like that." Victoria stepped away from the glass entrance and toward him again, though more carefully now, as if she had finally realized she was standing near something much larger than a missing prototype vehicle. "The board told everyone Omega failed," she said quietly. "They said the platform became unstable." Ethan glanced toward the truck outside. It became honest. Victoria's expression tightened slightly because she understood exactly what he meant. Brandon did not. "I still do not understand what is happening," he admitted. "How does a vehicle take authority away from executives?" Ethan looked at him for a moment before answering. "It does not." He nodded toward the presentation wall. "The building does." Brandon stared blankly. Victoria closed her eyes briefly as realization settled deeper into place. "You integrated Omega into the dealership network architecture," she said softly. Ethan nodded once. "Years ago." "Why?" Ethan looked around the showroom slowly, at the polished marble, the silent employees, the guests pretending not to panic, the expensive vehicles lined beneath carefully designed lighting. "Because luxury businesses lie to themselves more than any other industry," he said calmly. "They think money is the same thing as judgment." No one responded. Outside, the pickup headlights reflected across the wet pavement in long white streaks while the security officers remained frozen near the curb, uncertain whether they were guarding the truck or being evaluated by it. Victoria folded her arms slowly. "The board reopened Omega after you resigned," she admitted quietly. "They tried turning it into a consumer prediction engine." Ethan gave a faint smile without humor. "I know." Victoria looked genuinely startled. "How?" Ethan's eyes moved briefly toward the glowing screens overhead. "Because Omega kept sending reports." The silence after that answer felt different from the earlier ones. Heavier. More dangerous somehow. Brandon swallowed hard. "Reports to who?" Ethan looked directly at him for the first time since the evening began. To the only architect profile the system still trusted. Brandon's face lost what little color remained. Victoria stared at Ethan carefully now, studying not his clothes or the truck or the keycard, but the man himself. "You have been monitoring the company this entire time." Ethan considered the wording. "Not the company," he said quietly. "The decisions." Lily gently tugged his sleeve. "Dad," she whispered, "are we in trouble?" Ethan's expression softened immediately. He crouched slightly so he could answer her at eye level despite every executive and employee in the building watching him. "No," he said calmly. "But some people are about to have a very difficult week." Across the showroom, the central display wall suddenly changed again. This time the Helix emblem appeared larger than before, rotating once against a black background before dissolving into a stream of archived corporate files. Dates, audit records, internal approvals, prototype authorizations. Victoria's eyes widened instantly as she recognized executive signatures attached to programs the board had publicly denied existed. Brandon took one stunned step backward. "Those files were sealed," he whispered. Ethan slowly stood again and looked toward the screens with an expression that carried no satisfaction at all, only inevitability. Then the final line appeared across every display in silent silver letters while the rain continued falling outside the glass walls of Halcyon Motor Gallery. "Full executive review initiated."